in-depth analytical dashboards. So without further ado, Johnson Technology. Okay, they had to go around the table.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Joe Meenam, Joe Meenam Cannell, CEO of JTSI, Johnson Technology Systems. Thank you for your participation. We are a small SAP ERP specialty company out of Washington, D.C. metro area. And we are supporting the Army for the last 20 years. Specifically on the ERP sector, and also recently won the Army ERP services contract, and very much looking forward to supporting. Years ago, we found out the so-called LPTA is hitting the contracting side, and survival is the most important thing, and innovation is the way to go. And we also support and also a proud partner at the Stevens University in New Jersey for the Roundtable, Innovation Roundtable for the last 21 years. Innovation is the most important driver in JTSI. And it's always helped us to reduce the cost, increase the productivity. We have many innovation products and solutions. And those who know me here, don't worry, I'm not the innovation specialist. I'm not going to present anything. So you're lucky today. So with that, I will present Raj Rajendran, our specialist and technical director. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Joe. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Raj Rajendran. I'm from JTSI. And our challenge was... Okay, thank you. Our challenge has always been, how do we harness the power of supercomputing, right? And there's a industry confluence right now on in-memory computing, mobile computing, and then making use of that. And how do you do predictive analytics? How do you do preventive analytics, right? So, how do you go in and take care of fraud, waste, and abuse, for example, right? So there's a number of myriads of applications possible if you can harness the power of in-memory computing and also take into account the mobile computing as well. So what we did was we made use of an opportunity here called unliquidated obligations, right? And ULO is basically nothing but, mismanaged funds that has to be given back to the U.S. Treasury because, the finance managers have not been able to completely monetize the contract that's been obligated, right? So, okay. So we'll talk about what a ULO is, right? And then we talk about, the various constraints in ULO, why ULO is happening, and how can we prevent this ULO, right? So ULO is basically unliquidated obligations. As I said, these are all contracts that are being basically, spoken for in a given year, right? And then for some reason, those contracts have not been consummated, right? So in the previous years, in the subsequent years, now you're talking about money that's unspent, right? Congressionally, you really can't spend money in years once it's past the current year, right? You can only use the money to spend for, paying bills, right? But you really can't re-obligate money once, the time has passed. So you have some constraints imposed by the congressional accounting rules, right? So basically you're in a situation where, all the money allocated this year has to be spent this year, right? Unfortunate, right? So what happens is, in the heat of things, as soon as the Congress allocates and appropriates funding So all the finance managers have to go in and obligate all the funds as much as possible in the current year, right? If they don't obligate it, then whatever is not obligated, unfortunately, can't be reused, right? So they live in the books for 5 years. But then after the end of the 5th year, they all have to be handed over back to the US Treasury, right? So the magnitude of the problem is pretty severe, right? So what we'll do is, we'll talk about, what causes growback, and we also talk about, we'll do a case study, right? And what we did was we actually worked with the Army National Guard, with executive management of the Army National Guard, and basically we did a proof of concept, a prototype. We incubated a proof of concepts, and then actually that was well accepted, and that was actually moved into production in GFEBS with the help of our partner Accenture, right? So before I go further, there are some basic ground rules in terms of obligations, right? So there's something called a bona fide rule, right? So that talks about anything that has been given this year has to be met for the needs of this current time period. Basically, in other words, you can't go back and reuse it for some other purpose in subsequent years, right? And couple of other rules. Okay, so basically then also anything that's been allocated this year has to be completely consummated this year. So you don't have an option of reserving some percentage of the balance so that you can reuse it for subsequent years. That's one of the constraints placed by the US Treasury and the US Congress on all the DoD agencies, right? Okay, so what we did was we did a case study. We utilized the Army National Guard operations and maintenance account, right? So this is where, all the fundings are given by the US Congress for the operations and maintenance of the Army National Guard, right? So in year 1, what they did was, back in 2004, this is an actual case study, 99.88% of the funds have been obligated right in year 1, right? As they should be, right? But then there's a 0.12% fund that's not been obligated, right, which is left over in the books, right? Now, if you look at 2005, which is the current year back then, and then if you look at what happened to the funds obligated in 2004, the actual unobligated funds actually has grown a little bit from 0.11 to 0.76. So what really happened here was, what the finance manager thought was obligated became unobligated kind of magically, right? And there's a reason why this happens. We'll get into that. But before we do that, I would like to go forward and show you the enormity of the problem before we get into the actual whys and hows and whats, right? So you move on to year 2006, you see this red thing, the unobligated portion, growing even further, right? And this is all based on actual statistics, actual history, right? And then you go on to year 2007, which is the current year back then, you're seeing this unobligated fund, now it's 2.06, creeping up on you, right? And then finally, which is the 5th year, you're talking about 2.74% of the total obligation authority has to be totally handed back to the Treasury, right? Because according to the rules of the accounting, you can only have this 5 years in the books, and anything that's not been consummated has to be completely forfeited and handed back to the US Treasury, right? So to recap, what we started in 2004 at 0.12% has actually gone to 2.74% after 5 years, which is a canceling year. That totals to about $122 million of total funds allocated to the Army National Guard just for 1 year, just for 2004, that has to be handed back to the US Treasury, right? Then what we did was, we also looked at another account in Army National Guard, which is the personnel account, right? So the same problem. Back in 2004, it was 0.11%. And then, lo and behold, in 2009, you're looking at about $97 million of unused funds that has to be handed back to the U.S. Treasury, right? So this is humongous. And now you're talking about only for 1 year, for year 2004, right? So if you cumulatively look at the same problem for 2005 and 6 and 7, now you understand the magnitude of the problem that actually happens, and you have to hand over all this money back to the U.S. Treasury. Now, the question is, why is this happening, right? So every finance manager, as soon as he or she receives the funding, so they have to obligate everything in the current year. As per the rules of the accounting we saw earlier, you don't have latitude to reserve some funds for later use, right? So you're under the gun right from day one to obligate to commit all these funds as quickly as possible, right? So that's one issue that's causing the problem. So also the other thing is overly aggressive contracts. People think that, okay, I need to go in and obligate everything. So what happens is they come up with unrealistic goals, contract goals, and then, later on they realize that, they really can't consummate the entire contract as they thought they would, right? So now you're talking about, funding that's been allocated, obligated, but unfortunately can't be consummated because the scope is too large, right? Then the other issue is, you are on a target, right? In the current fight on the terrorism, right? You have a target. Every agency has a target, and they have to meet the target. They have to spend according to the target, right? But then when they're not really managing well, they kind of obligated because they're under the gun to obligate something. But then what happens is in the heat of the things, subsequent years, they totally forget about how the contract has been executed. So money has to be given back, right? So those are the root causes, right? Now, we all want to obligate as much as possible. The reason being, we want to make sure that, the community, the warfighter community actually benefits as much to the maximum extent possible. And also we want to obligate it so that, we're all good stewards of our funds that's been given to us. And then finally, if we don't completely use all the funding that's given to us, then, for the subsequent years, we're not going to get the appropriate funding from Congress. So basically we have to show Congress that whatever is being allocated to us indeed has been planned well, has been spent well. Otherwise what happens the next forecast, they're not going to take it seriously. They're going to discount a certain percentage of what you're asking, right? So those are the reasons why there's a rush to obligate everything up front. I have a technical challenge here. Play. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So what we did was, basically based on this, we actually did a proof of concept. We incubated a proof of concept. We actually have our own labs. So we used SAP HANA for this, and then we used the SAP mobile computing platform. Now you're talking about any time you want to do some interactive analysis like this, you're talking about 18 to 20 terabytes of data. So GFEBS has that large amount of data. So you're talking about analyzing the spend pattern for every agency over and hundreds of contracts and about thousands of transactions, thousands and millions of transactions, right? So you're talking about a computing power that's really needed, right? So what we did was we partnered with SAP, NS2, and then they gave us a HANA platform in the cloud, right? So we utilized the HANA platform and their mobile environment, and we actually incubated a proof of concept, right? So I can't show you the entire demo here, but what I have is some screenshots, right? So this analysis, there are two pieces to this, right? On the left side, you'll see, all the obligation analytics. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see all the quality of obligations, right? So what happens is, everybody obligates money, but then, there's something called a quality of obligation, right? Like what we saw, if the quality of obligation is really poor, meaning that, overly aggressive contracts that can't be consummated, that is a low quality obligation. So those are the ones that actually contribute this unliquidated obligation, this grow back in the future, right? So what we want to do is preemptively, proactively, we want to identify, those areas where there's a risk of underspend. And then, what we want to do is proactively reallocate within subgroups, sub-agencies of that agency, and so that, we can effectively reallocate funding, right? So that's the whole idea, right? So this dashboard gives you two pieces of it, right? One is open. How do we, what's not obligated is pretty simple, straightforward, right? So you have two pie charts, right, on the left and the right. And the first pie chart shows you the total amount of money that's been obligated, right? And then the second pie chart shows you the obligation ratio. The obligation ratio is nothing but what has been obligated over what's been committed, what's been budgeted, right? So what happens is, as you move the dial below there, it shows you all the agencies that have underallocated or overallocated beyond a certain obligation ratio, right? So if I want to look at what agencies are under-obligating below 0.60, then this analytics will actually show me, okay, these are all the agencies that are under-allocating below 0.60, and these are all the agencies that are over-allocating above and beyond 0.60, right? Okay, so that's the detailed view. It shows you all the agencies. Now keep in mind, in order to do this analytics in real time, you're talking about crunching, like close to like about 10 to 12 terabytes of data in real time and bringing it up, right? And you're talking about milliseconds, right? So, the SAP HANA platform actually helped us doing this. Now, this is actually technology agnostic, right? You don't have to use SAP HANA platform. You can use Hadoop technology, and you don't have to use SAP Business Objects. You can use other competing analytical products. Okay. All right. So now comes the second part of this, which is the poor quality obligations, right? So what we want to do here is, we're assuming a linear spend assumption, right? So basically we're saying, okay, we have $12 million to spend in 12 months. So, in a linear algorithm, I'm talking about, consuming $4 million at the end of the fourth month, right? So at the end of the fourth month, if I haven't consumed $4 million, that means I'm not linearly proportionately consuming it. Therefore, something may be suspect, something could be wrong. It's worth looking into that sub-agency to see how they're spending, how they're managing their funds, right? So that is the principle behind identifying what's a low quality obligation and what's a bad quality, good quality obligation, right? So there are two factors here that make up a good quality obligation. One is, the total amount of dollars, and the other is the contract time, right? So if I keep the total amount of dollars funding constant, let's say $12 million, and then if I have 1 year to spend that means, I have to spend like 1 million a month, right? Or if I collapse that contract life cycle from 12 months to 6 months for the same $12 million, now I'm looking at a spend rate of $2 million a month, so that, I can be in a linear consumption rate, right? On the opposite, if I freeze the time and then vary the contract value, the same thing happens, right? So if I have a 6 months, and if I have $12 million to spend, that means I have to spend $2 million a month. And for the same 6 months, if I change it to 12 months, then I have a little more latitude. I can spend $1 million a month, right? So basically, those are the two factors that go to make up the linear consumption model: the total dollar value of the contract, and also the total length of the contract, right? So those two factors, we make use of those two factors to determine, right, what the burn rate should be, right? So based on the burn rate, then what we do is we see what is the consumption, the actual consummated dollar amount. about, right? So for that, what we do is we go into the transaction master and the transaction detail, and then what we do is for every contract, so every agency can have about hundreds of contracts. For each contract, we go into every minor single transaction detail, and we see what has been consummated, what has been spent, right? Then we roll it up. So what we have is, on one hand, we have the burn rate in a linear algorithm, how much should have been consumed. Then, on the other hand, we also have what has actually been consumed. So we have the actual versus the, the should be, right? All right, so here I have Army National Guard, Arkansas National Guard, which is one of the sub-agency for the Army National Guard, right? And so they're red. And the reason they're red is, if you look at the projected burn rate, it should be about $4 million. If you look at the actual year-to-date expenses from the beginning of the year to now, it's only about 1.06. So they're already falling behind the projected burn rate, right? So therefore, that's a red flag, something that needs to be looked into it. They may be okay, but there's something proactively. Can we do something in order to reallocate funding, right? Then you have Florida National Guard, which is green. If you look at their projected burn rate, that should be $3 million, and they're actually spending ahead of the projected burn rate. So maybe that's an agency that's really spending things much better. Maybe they're planning things better. So maybe they may need more money. So that might be an opportunity for us to reallocate money from an underperforming sub-agency to a sub-agency that's performing really well, right? So that's a kind of analysis, proactive analysis that can be done, right? So then you also have the contract master. So what we do is we go into the contract master for every contract in Arkansas National Guard, for example. We actually look into all the contract values and then the time. So each contract can have different burn rate, right? So we actually sum it up, and then we have a total burn rate for the for each agency, right? So okay, so shows the technology behind it. So we're using HANA, we're using SAP Business Object, and then we're also using all the data visualization techniques, right? And this runs in the cloud. It's not a secure cloud. It's our own little lab environment. So the beauty is we demonstrated this to the Army management in Arkansas in Army National Guard, and they were extremely impressed. So then we worked with Accenture, and then we actually rolled this into production. So it is in production actually, and there's a tremendous monetary impact, right? So our goal for JTSI has been, work on, cost drivers and revenue enablers, and how do we make things simplified and optimized, right? So this is an example. So we have other examples like EKR. We have other examples that talks about, effective fraud, waste, and abuse and analytics, right? So just an example that we came up with. And the nice thing is, this is actually being adopted, and this is actually being moved into production in GFEBs, right? So with that, I think I'll open it up for questions.
Sir, how much traction have you had with the Department of the Army?
Oh, actually, we have this implemented in GFEBs.
Okay.
Okay, so that's one. And we exactly right.
So is that the ConOps as you expect at the PEO level for at the acquisition or higher?
I think at the PM level it would be a good tool, or maybe higher. We've mostly been focused at the PM level.
Yeah, we've been focusing at the PM level mostly.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right. And also we we are talking to other agencies as well in terms of harnessing this technique. The biggest challenge has been they all have plethora of data, huge amounts of data, right? So how do we do this in the cloud? That's our next challenge, right? So we want to build it once and we want to roll it multiple times, right? So so how do we optimize this whole thing?
How do you validate the accuracy of the data that goes into the tool?
Sure. So it's a good question. How do we validate the accuracy of the data that goes into the tool? So the data you're seeing here is being scrubbed, right, because of confidentiality reasons, right? So basically what we did was we went into the historical information for Army National Guard. That was public information. So we actually took that and we populated that in our own lab. And then based on this analysis, we actually validated, we back tested, if you will. And then that worked out well. Then we actually took that to another sub-agency, the Florida National Guard, and they were kind enough to give us some information for 3 years. So we actually back tested. So that gave us a sense of confidence, right? And then basically then we rolled it to GFEBS. So they actually back tested with some of their production data, which we didn't get to see, of course, right? So based on that, you know, there was a sense of confidence really went up. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot to AUSA.